Hello, and welcome to the State of 911 webinar series hosted by NHTSA's National 911 Program. My name is Brian Tegmeyer, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. This webinar series is designed to provide useful information for the 911 stakeholder community about federal, state, and local participation in the planning, design, and advancement of 911. It includes real experiences from leaders utilizing these processes throughout the country. In today's session, you will hear about grant funding opportunities for 911 centers through the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program from the U.S. Department of Transportation. The upcoming funding round provides resources for planning and demonstration projects aimed at preventing roadway deaths and serious injuries. We'll explore how 911 centers can apply for SS4A funding independently or collaborate with local, municipal, and regional transportation partners. You will hear insights from a current SS4A awardee on the application process and lessons learned. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on 911.gov. For information on the National 911 Program webinars, access to archived recordings, or to learn more about the National 911 Program, please visit 911.gov. Feedback or questions about the webinars can be sent to nhtsa.national911@dot.gov. The National 911 Program would also like to make you aware of the Documents and Tools section of our website at 911.gov. Stakeholders are encouraged to submit links and documents that would be of use and interest to your 911 colleagues, including policy documents, plans, reports across several topics, including governance, management, operations, post-crash care, standards and best practices, and technical information. You may access the webpage under the Resources drop-down menu or scan the QR code in the bottom right corner of this slide. Content can be submitted by clicking the online submission form on the top right side of the Docs and page on the Docs and Tools page. The National 911 Program would also like to invite you to visit the 911 Telecommunicator Tree of Life and share a story about a remarkable 911 telecommunicator who has inspired you. With National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week approaching next month, it's a great time to share your story at 911treeoflife.org, honoring that special telecommunicator or 911 center who is making a difference in your community. Please note that all participants' phone lines have been put in listen-only mode, and this webinar is being recorded. To ask questions of our presenters, feel free to submit a question through the Q&A tool. You can do this by using Zoom's QA feature located on the bottom of your screen in the meeting controls. You can enter your question at any time during the presentation, and it will be entered into the queue. Hover your mouse over the bottom of the page to access meeting controls. Individuals registered for this webinar will receive access to today's PowerPoint presentation and the webinar recording. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. We are honored to have Andrew Emanuel and Angie Byrne from the U.S. Department of Transportation, as well as Aaron Maciariello from the Charleston County Public Safety 911 Center here today. They bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to our discussion. And we will start with Andrew and Angie.
Thank you, Brian. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Emanuele, and I'm the program manager for the Safe Streets and Roads for All program in the U.S. Department of Transportation in the Office of the Secretary. Today, I'm going to give you a high-level look at the program itself. We're going to talk about how it can apply to you, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. All right, so Safe Streets and Roads for All is a $5 billion discretionary grant program, and we give out roughly $1 billion a year over 5 years. We are in the 4th year of the program, which means we've given out roughly $3 billion for preventing roadway deaths and serious injuries. That's the main focus of this program. We do this by focusing on comprehensive safety action planning, putting together a plan for your area, region. These can differ in size, but and they go by different names, such as Vision Zero. Your local region probably has a lot of different names for them, but we do that by doing the planning and then implementing those plans, either through behavioral changes, pilot programs, or actual construction of projects. And we'll talk about what some of those things are. If you're not familiar with the Safe System approach through USDOT, there's a link here at the bottom. You can take a look at that. It is inclusive, this grant, of all those types of roadway safety interventions, and we do want to follow that Safe System approach, which has the proven safety countermeasures. All right, so Safe Streets and Roads for All funding to date. Last year, we gave over $1.2 billion in funding for the fiscal year 24 cycle. This included 710 regional, local, and tribal communities that received awards. In the Office of the Secretary, this is far and away the largest program in terms of the number of awards that go out. Some of these are small planning grants, not a ton of money, and it's relatively easy to apply for those. And you have a very good chance of getting them. And we'll talk about what that means, but we like to put a lot of these out on the street to help communities plan. So over, the course of the previous 3 years, we've awarded 1,800 grants to different communities totaling $3 billion. And awards to date will improve roadway safety planning for over 75% of the nation's population. What that means is these plans cover the population, 75% of the population of the United States fall under the jurisdiction of what these plans cover. All right, so let's talk about SS4A grants themselves. You may not be familiar with some of these acronyms, so I'm going to go ahead and try to explain everything, what they all mean. Eligible recipients are regional organizations. These can be MPOs or a council of government. Metropolitan Planning Organization is if you're not familiar with yours, it's required in any area over 50,000 in population. There's some big ones in the United States, for example, in the Twin Cities here where I am, the Met Council is the MPO. If you're in San Diego, it's called SANDAG. If you're in Philadelphia, DVRPC is the big one. In Colorado, Dr. Cog. So you may be familiar with the name if you're not exactly sure what they do, but they do surface roadway planning for populations over 50,000 in the US, and they're required by the federal government to exist. So you can partner with them if you'd like to, get with a surface transportation community, and they should be reaching out to different folks, and you can coordinate with them on getting this done. So many have been awarded SS4 grants to develop the action plans in coordination with these communities, and these MPOs and COGs are often advocates for applying safe system approaches, including post-crash care. So they do all the planning, so that's why they're important. Now, political subdivision of a state that usually almost always applies to cities and counties. Federally recognized tribal governments are also a part of this, and then multi-jurisdictional groups comprised of the above. These awards do not go on the state level. States have their own state level safety planning they have to do, but these are more targeted on the local jurisdictional level. Eligible activities. There's two buckets essentially for eligible activities with this program. One is planning and demonstration, and the other is what we call implementation, which includes implementing something from the safety plan or construction. We'll get down into exactly what that means in a little bit here, but eligible activities include developing a comprehensive safety action plan, and that goes by many names. Vision Zero. There's a lot. Every different community can call it something different, but it is a comprehensive meeting. It looks at all the modes. When I say modes, I mean bicycle, pedestrian, automobiles, wheelchairs, everything that relates to surface transportation within your area. So you can develop or complete that safety action plan with the funding for this. You can conduct supplemental planning with this grant money, including specific areas you'd like to look at, including pedestrian or post-crash care or something else you'd like to study in addition to this action plan. But the action plan must be complete in order to get these supplemental planning dollars, or you can do them at the same time. And then carrying out demonstration activities. So if you want to demonstrate a program or a pilot that you're looking at, you can get money to do that as well. And then planning, design, and development activities for project and strategies identified in that action plan, and then implementing those projects. Important point here at the bottom, any department or agency or a combination of departments and agencies in a community can submit a single consolidated grant application. We do encourage folks to work together when they're applying here. So engineering, planning, public health, housing, medical emergency services all have received grants to develop these comprehensive multimodal action plans and conduct associated supplemental planning and demonstration activities for their communities. What are these planning and demonstration activities? There's a lot of them. We're just going to go through a few of them here. There's more on our website if you want to dig down into what's possible. And we're going to talk about what more would apply to you a little bit later in the presentation today. So an action plan. So you can get money to develop, update, or complete that comprehensive safety action plan that I mentioned. Now there are, I believe it's actually 8 components to an action plan, and we can help you work through exactly what those mean. Even if you wanted to check your action plan against us, we can review it to make sure it is meeting all the criteria that you need to be eligible to get the other components of this grant program. Supplemental planning is not comprehensive, but it's more targeted. So you think about topical safety plans here. If you're familiar with road safety audits, driving the roadway and seeing what the safety issues are along it, conducting additional safety analysis and data collection, follow-up stakeholder engagement. We here at the DOT love stakeholder engagement, and we don't want things happening in a silo. We want folks weighing in on what's happening in their community. And then safe routes to school plans are another example of supplemental targeted specific planning that you can do with these dollars. And then demonstration activities. These are feasibility studies using quick build strategies. An important note on these, they are time bound. This is, you have to have a start and an end date that you're going to do this demonstration, and then take a look at what worked and what didn't and determine if you're going to apply something permanently for which you could apply for implementation grants. So if you look at the bottom left, we've got a quick build example. We've got a bike lane that was put up with some bike bollards, and they're using that to see how the community reacts, how the bicyclists react to it, how the people that live on that street react to it, and how the motorists react to it, and using that to determine if they want to move forward with putting a bike lane there. Again, pilot programs for behavioral or operational activities. A lot of those might apply to you if you want to try something new within your area related to 911. Pilot programs for new technology. And then the last point here, the MUDCD. This is a little more engineering, but relates to engineering studies that can be conducted. All right. Advance my slide here. Trying to. Opportunities with planning and demonstration grants. So this is an important point I want to flag here. This 40% of SS4A funding is required to be for planning and demonstration, meaning that $1 billion, 40% of it needs to go to SS4A planning and demonstration, which, considering that those usually are not large dollar amounts that are awarded for planning and demonstration, we are looking for a lot of applicants. If you are able to apply and put together some data for your community and talk about those proven safety countermeasures, there's a very good chance you're going to get funded. The application process for planning itself is not very difficult. I think it's 2 to 3 pages that you're required to put together to send to us, which is not a heavy lift for a grant program where you see some of the other ones I see here, 15 to 20 pages. So that can include developing action plans that can help with getting non-SS4A funding at the local, state, regional, or federal level for you. This also does help guide local decision making. You're going to want to have these plans in place as they do lead to safety improvements. Applications can also include combinations of developing the action plans with assorted supplemental planning or demonstration activities, which is a very important point. You can bundle these things together within your application and receive multiple awards for these different activities, all bundled together. Implementation grants. So we use the word implementation here. Think of it as construction or implementing some of these strategies or behavioral changes that you identified within your action plan. So implementation grant applications must fund projects and strategies identified in that action plan. So you have to have that action plan complete first. And if you've completed it through some other means, you can send it to us. We can check it, make sure it's compliant, and then you can apply for the implementation grants. But the important thing is that you do need to have that action plan, and it does need to tie to what you're applying for with the implementation grants. Infrastructure, behavioral, and operational safety activities are all eligible, which runs a pretty wide gamut of things you can do with this. As I just stated, applicants must have the qualifying action plan in place, and implementation applications may also include supplemental planning and demonstration activities. And that's another important point. You can apply for these construction dollars, and at the same time, you can do supplemental planning if you want to do a targeted planning study, or if you have demonstration activities you'd like to try out. All these things can be bundled together. But with that, construction is the main one there, and that can include that. Important to note that supplemental planning and demonstration can be included in both categories. So there's a lot of options. All right, so now we're going to talk about Charleston County 911. They received almost $1.3 million in fiscal year 24 for full CAD-to-CAD computer-aided dispatch to address overlapping jurisdictional areas between the city of Charleston and the city of North Charleston and Berkeley and Dorchester counties, to improve emergency response times. And they did that and they also updated the Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester Council of Governments Safety Action Plans. So they had two things that were considered there. And I believe we're going to talk about that a little more in depth here. So I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, who will speak to that.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this. So just to give you a little bit of information on our project specifically, I'm going to move to the next slide here. Just some context. So as Andrew said, we worked in collaboration with our local council of government, and our plan was built around a CAD to CAD implementation to directly support ourselves, Berkeley and Dorchester counties, overlapping jurisdictional areas that we had. So probably a lot of like some of you out there, we have pockets of areas in all three counties that belong to multiple jurisdictions, and we share those response areas. And so a lot of the times we end up having, manual calls that are transferred and things like that, so that we can get both the fire and police responders and EMS. And so for us, our project it falls into post-crash care, and that's the area that we wanted to focus on. So we've been working on our project for quite some time, our CAD to CAD solution. And we feel like it's going to bring a host of benefits to our center and our partners, specifically reduction of call transfer times between jurisdictions, also reduction of human error, which benefits our citizens, improved workflows, which would benefit our employees as well. And CAD to CAD has huge implications on automatic and mutual aid. And that's a well-known gap that we experience in 911, getting call information back to an agency when you're answering calls for them. So as I said, we focused on those overlapping jurisdictional areas in our neighboring counties. And for the project, we were focusing specifically on EMS response times to traffic accidents in those roadways of those adjoining counties. So a little bit about our application, our experience with our application process. I would encourage you, there's a self-certification worksheet that's provided on the DOT website for this, on the Safe Streets website. Utilize that. It's a really good checklist to see where you are in terms of whether you're qualifying right now and what steps you need to take to make sure you would qualify for the grant. The next step would be valid eval. For us, we had to get a valid eval account. So this grant application was not on the typical grants.gov application website. So valid eval, you need an account for that so that you can actually submit for the grant itself. The next part of the application was to identify the crash data, and then also identifying the disadvantaged census tracts. So a lot of that information for the crash data can be received through FARS, the Fatality Analysis Reporting System. Also, a lot of times your state's Department of Public Safety or Highway Department may have that crash data that you can use for the application to gather that information. And then the disadvantaged census tracts, these are essentially areas that are identified as disadvantaged or are marginalized in various categories. There's a list of the categories, but it's typically stuff like housing or transportation, workforce development, those types of areas. So once you identify which of those tracts are in your jurisdiction, and how your project will impact those areas, that has to be listed in your application. Since we worked with our Council of Governments, we had to enter into an MOA with the BCD-COG to utilize their safety action plan, but then also to provide data back to them to inform their safety action plan. And then depending on your project's goals, it could be very beneficial to get letters of support from any partnering agencies or anyone in your area that might be interested in collaborating with you. And again, as I said, we worked with the BCD COG on that. As I said before, our total project was 1.6 million. That was 1.29 million that we received in federal funding, and then the local matching contributions for us, that was about 193, a little over that. All of those funds are going to be allocated towards our implementation of the CAD to CAD, and we're looking for over the 5-year grant period. So we're talking about using the money for the technology integration itself, but then also maintenance, and then data-driven improvements to the response as well, response efficiency. And I think I also like to point out, this is it's set up as the grant set up as reimbursement. So you are submitting your invoices to recoup the money that's spent on the project. So that was something that I wanted to point out as well. So just the implementation plan for us, and this was basically after we had our project kickoff meeting. Once you're awarded the grant, you'll have your project kickoff meeting. The biggest piece I'd like to point out is the grant agreement. It's a requirement for this grant. Also, you'll have to do a risk assessment and a budget review while you're doing while you're working on the grant agreement. A template is provided. So basically, you just receive the template from your grant manager, and then you modify it with your agency and project information. You may have a few back and forths to get the verbiage and everything worked out, but this is a large part of it, a large part of the work that you'll be doing up front. You can't receive any of the grant funds or any reimbursements of the grant funds until you have that executed agreement. So a lot of the grant work can't really take place until you get that part out of the way. For our specific project, we're looking to have an 80% reduction in call transfer times between the 911 centers involved in the project, which we feel will have improved EMS response times. And as I said, we will provide metrics to the BCD COG to publish with their safety action plan. But there's some other outcomes that we feel are related to, that aren't related to the grant, increased interoperability with our neighboring counties, as well as using this CAD implementation as a hub, allowing connections from other agencies that want to partner with us, which we feel only further bolsters mutual aid and automatic aid capabilities and interoperabilities with 911 centers. So for our project, we worked with a grant writer to assist us with this application. This was a big plus in terms of coordination of data and information that's needed for the application itself. So if you have the ability to do that, I would highly suggest that. We were working on this. This was a big project, and we were working on this for quite some time before we decided to go the route of Safe Streets for All. So we had already a lot of the data surrounding the project, and we already knew how we wanted to implement it. So that helped us out. I would suggest if you don't have that, if you spend some time to really think through the project ahead of time, get the numbers, get the data from your partner's data information, the call their CAD types, their RMS systems, how they're connected, their phone, their CHE, all that kind of stuff, call volume, all that information is helpful to get ahead of time. Some of the things that we realized could have been an improvement was an earlier alignment between the jurisdictions to further streamline the planning process. We ended up working with the BCD COG on their with their safety action plan, But initially, when we entered into this, we didn't realize that was an option for us. So our first plan was to create a safety action plan. That's what our kind of first swing at it. We were quite a ways through kind of trying to figure that part out before we realized that we could partner with the BCD cog, and so we kind of stepped back and shifted directions, and that was a big help. So having that up front would have been very helpful for us. So once we have our funding secured, we're going to begin our procurement process and then implement the CAD-to-CAD API. We'll be required to provide regular updates to the public, and then also regular updates to our Council of Government to inform their safety action plan. And then we also anticipate that we'll be expanding this project to integrate additional counties and partners outside of our Tri-County area. So that's kind of on our future radar. And that's it. I think we're going to have a Q&A at the end, so if there's any questions for me, I'd happy to answer them. But thank you all.
Thanks, Aaron. So there you had a good look at an on-the-ground action that you can do with this funding that really can improve your community. So now we're going to look at some of the common planning and demonstration grant issues we're seeing when folks are applying. The first one is a pretty big one, that the action plan proposed was not comprehensive in nature. So it was just an engineering study, or it was a pedestrian focused study, or a bicycle corridor focused study. The comprehensive component of this is extremely important. It needs to cover the entire jurisdiction, but more importantly, it needs to cover all the different modes, as I mentioned to you. Every surface transportation mode needs to be covered in there. It needs to be comprehensive. The second one gets into just what I was talking about, limited to a specific area, a corridor, or a specific audience, or it was an ineligible statewide plan. Statewide plans are not eligible for this. They have their own system that they use. Another one, a key one that I've talked about a couple times, lack of connection between the action plan and the supplemental planning or demonstration activities. So we do planning for a reason. So, if you do the plan, the stuff that follows it needs to tie back to the plan. Otherwise, if we can't make that connection, we'll be pretty hesitant to give an award. And then finally, the scope went beyond a demonstration, pilot, and scale. Remember, I said that the demonstration grants need to be finite in time. They need to be time bound. We need to know when they begin and when they end. If you're looking at no end date, maybe you're trying to do it permanently, and we would flag that. Implementation grant issues. Implementation, again, are the operational, behavioral, or construction grants. Lack of connection made between the safety problems and the proposed countermeasures. Again, you need to identify the safety problem and how you're going to fix it, and they need to be related. They need to have a connection there. You can use FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, or the FTA, Federal Transit Administration, or NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and other resources to identify effective countermeasures. So those proven safety countermeasures that I mentioned at the beginning, there's a link. There's a link at the beginning that really shows you what those are, and those are key components to this. Second bullet, lack of discussion of collaboration with other entities and a lack of details about community engagement and outreach. If you've done it, please make sure you put it into your application. We are big on that. We want to see all the folks collaborating on this, and we want to see agreements with everyone moving forward. Letters of support were mentioned earlier. We'd like to see those things. It does matter. And then finally, many action plans did not meet the necessary SS4 requirements, such as being multimodal or multidisciplinary in nature. Again, comprehensive. Webinars and resources. So the Notice of Funding Opportunity is going to open soon. We're targeting the end of this month, actually, roughly 10 days, that this NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, is going to hit the streets. So we do have time for action plan eligibility review requests that can be submitted by May 9th. That means if you already have an action plan, you can submit it to us and we will review it to make sure it is compliant, meaning that you could then apply for the implementation dollars to receive that. And that way you can ensure that your plan is compliant before applying for those implementation dollars. You can submit any technical questions by May 29th, 2025 at 5 p.m. to ss4a@dot.gov. And the wonderful folks on the other side will answer those questions to the best of their ability. And then we're looking for the applications to be in by June 26th, 2025 at 5 p.m. sharp. Additional resources about the SS4A program and the notice of funding opportunity can be found at transportation.gov /grants/SS4A. And I want to see if it's in here, but we will be having webinars. I don't think that's in display yet. We will be having webinars after the notice of funding opportunity is live. There's going to be 3 of them. If you haven't subscribed to our listserv, you can do that on our website, and that'll let you know when those are occurring. But we will have the 3 different webinars, and they'll be placed on the website. You can go and read or look at them anytime you want. And they'll look at the different components in different areas and break it down in much more depth and detail than I'm doing today. We also have application aids, a series of checklists, planning worksheets, and fillable forms that are available on the SS4A website in the valid eval application form. Valid eval is, again, the third-party resource we're using to submit these applications. It's much easier to use that system than what we used previously, which was grants.gov. It's a lot more user-friendly. So we chose that program because it helps people apply, and it's not as bureaucratic and federal government, to be frank, as grants.gov. So it's a lot easier, and that's why we use it. And it does include all sorts of resources when you're applying that can help you walk through the process. So there's all sorts of forms and stuff that can help you do this. And then we have a nice little QR code because we are fancy here at USDOT. You can scan that with your phone and it will take you right to our website. And then with that, I believe I'm done. I might be turning it over to Brian, I believe.
Yes, thank you so much, Andrew and Aaron. I'm so happy to get that information and share it with everyone in the community. We've got a lot of questions, but before we start into the questions we have, what I wanted to do was talk about the different types of 911 projects that you might be considering. And I think it's important to know that outside of the track record of Charleston County and their CAD to CAD project, we don't have a lot of other 911 grants. We don't have a specific 911 grant. We have public safety related grant funding, but specifically to a 911 center, that is our only case from last year. So we're looking to get more out there. So these ideas still, even the ones I'm going to talk about, I'm talking from the 911 program, not from the Safer Streets for All grant program. These are just ideas. You have to tie them to the notice of funding opportunity. You have to comply with the requirements as described already by my colleagues at DOT office. But when I think about this, I think about, 911 operations. So what are we talking about? It could be call taking protocols, EMD and other protocols that could improve post-crash care by being able to provide bystander care. Maybe you have them, but you need to upgrade to computer-based systems, or you need to add quality assurance or something like that. So there's a possibility that there is an operations issue. Other operations, training, could include stuff like your traffic incident management training for 911 or things like that. So there's look at what you can do operationally that is going to improve your response to a crash or prevent crash and make highways safer. Interoperability. I mean, the CAD to CAD is sort of the immediate thought of how do you interoperate better with your neighbors? How do you get the closest unit to a crash? In a previous webinar that you can find on 911.gov, we highlighted a CAD to CAD solution from the Denver metropolitan area where South Metro and West Metro fire departments were using CAD to CAD, and they were seeing like a 2-minute improvement in response times. So again, saving lives and getting to those crash victims sooner can be important. GIS is another area. If you need to build GIS layers, you need to get like mile markers on your roads layer built into your map to get more accurate dispatching, as the FCC's ruled on location-based routing and device location, that we're getting more accurate ideas of where our callers are. But is your GIS data accurate enough to dispatch and to dispatch the right units? If you need to build upon that or add to that, that could be another opportunity as well. And then data collection. Maybe you need to, invest in a data collection tool. Maybe this is part of the planning, is you've got to figure out things like what percentage of your calls are occurring on roadways, and what can you map to the roadways from your call handling equipment, and where will that make future decisions for you if you know about that. So we are looking in and trying to research this at the 911 program underneath it to try to figure out, what percentage of calls are occurring on the roadways. We think it's significant. There's some published data that says it's at least 20%. I actually think it's a lot more. We're a mobile society, and you're getting calls from mobile devices, and many of those devices are calling you from the roadway. So what are your call load? What are your issues? Where are your biggest incidents? Maybe it's, a mass casualty dispatch response. Maybe it's software for, knowing where the closest unit is and doing move ups or things like that. All of it is a possibility. It's how you tell the story, how you develop your plan, how do you tie this to traffic safety. There's also some video and AI solutions, something that can help identify wrong way drivers, vehicles leaving the roadway, or crash detection. All could be opportunities for a Safe Streets for All grant. No guarantees, right? It's about what you can develop within the notice of funding opportunity and what you can do within a safety action plan to build on these ideas. So I think you have to tell the story. It has to fit within the confines of the grant, but I think there's a lot of ideas. And again, we've been working with the program for the last year, 2 years, to talk about 911's impact on highway safety. I mean, everything 911 does impacts highway safety by the very nature of we dispatch police, fire, and EMS, and those agencies become vulnerable road users going to calls. So I think there's a lot of ways we can impact that. So that's that's where I think we want to start from this, and a lot of you are going to have things to think about, but we have a ton of questions we're going to try to get through as quick as we can. So I'm going to tee off the questions, and then from there, I will look to see who in the team wants to be able to answer them. So I know our first question is going to be answered by Angie, and it is, would an agency organized under a joint powers agreement, a JPA, be considered multi-jurisdiction?
So most likely, I can't say for certain, but if all the organizations within your JPA are public entities, so you're talking about like a county and a city, or a county MPO, city MPO, multiple jurisdictions, I know that's very common with police agencies, then yes, a JPA would be included. What I would recommend in this, when you apply, because we mainly see like MOUs and MOAs included as part of our applications. So I would recommend there's an optional documents option in valid eval. So when you apply for the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, and I hope it is really when you apply for the program, make sure to include that JPA agreement in your optional document so it's clear who's all involved in your JPA.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, with the volatility of federal grant funds, how certain is grant funding? And is there any concern on the award or the grant being canceled midway through the project? And I know that's a tough question for us in the federal government to answer right now, but Andrew, do you want to tee it up?
Yeah, I can take that one since I'm right at the heart of it. This program, safety is the primary concern of the new administration. This program is not going to be canceled. It has $2 billion left. We are moving forward with it. There's nothing that's going to be removed from it. We haven't completed the grant agreements for the previous awards because we're aligning the grant agreement, which you heard mentioned, to be more in alignment with the administration's new executive orders. So this is happening. These aren't going to be canceled or pulled or anything. And even with this cycle, it's going to be in alignment with the new administration. So there's less of a concern there. So it's going to happen.
Great. The next question is one that I know often comes up during grants, and that is really about the issue of supplanting. And I think that maybe Angie and Andrew, one of you could describe this more, but the question is, can this fund projects that have already been designed or ordered but not yet implemented, or is it strictly for new projects?
Angie, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can. That's actually a great one. because there is a 5-year limitation on our implementation grants, like we want you to be far along in the planning stages. That's why we actually have the planning and demo part to try to actually get us to those implementation projects. So what you're describing is spot on, and absolutely it is for things that have not already been started, but there's a solid plan in place, and you will have to complete your projects within 5 years of executing your grant award. So great question.
I think the next couple of questions we're going to ask are going to be maybe more for Aaron. A question was how tried to answer it in my statement, but how does CAD to CAD reduce call transfer times?
Yeah, so for us, we're looking for a complete push-pull API for our CAD to CAD. So since these are overlapping jurisdictional areas that we're focusing on, we could receive a call where an agency that we dispatch for has to go for police and fire, but then Berkeley or Dorchester County has to respond for EMS. Now our process is that once we handle the call, we have to manually transfer that call to the other county to get their responders. With the push-pull API for CAD to CAD, it doesn't matter who takes the call goes into their respective CAD and it pushes to the agency that needs to respond, whether it's us or Berkeley or Dorchester. So it removes that requirement of transferring the call, which reduces the call transfer times and also improves the response times.
Great. Next question for you, Aaron, is did you receive funding for a comprehensive action plan plus implementation at the same time, or is this in different fiscal year stages?
So we did not receive funding for a comprehensive action plan. We partnered with the BCD COG, the Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester Council of Governments, to use their safety action plan. So our grant was specifically for a demonstration project off of their safety action plan.
And I think you mentioned in your report that if the demonstration goes well, you're going to expand your CAD to CAD to more connections and everything else. So you're going to prove the concept that it works and then expand and build from there.
Correct.
Right. But and then the other thing that I want to add to that question is that, as Andrew mentioned in the early slides, if you look at the Safer Streets for All grant website, you're going to see who the metropolitan planning organizations are and all the people that may have those plans already created, and many of them are not going to have post-crash care elements. So it's a great opportunity for you to work with those people in your area that may be a new partner to the 911 community and the traffic safety community partnering together, but they're looking for post-crash care elements, and you guys might be able to complement each other. And Angie or Andrew, do you want to add on that?
That is absolutely something that should be done. Now, MPOs, they are required to do a certain amount of planning, but they're not always aware of what, the 911 community is looking for, especially related to post-crash care. I know this, I used to review their plans. So that is a great idea to reach out to that MPO and see what they're doing and see if you can get something, work with them to put something together for this, because they've probably already done a lot of this planning, and you can use that and piggyback on what they're doing to move forward. So great point.
I would say just to add a little bit more to that, when we reached out to our Council of Government, this was almost a complete blind spot in their safety action plan. So it wasn't even an area that they were considering. It happened to fit into and so it worked out well in our favor.
Great. Couple questions about grant writing. Is this something that you need a grant writer for, or can you apply without one? And if you did use one, are there costs eligible to be included, or they have to be excluded from the grant reimbursement?
Well, so I think I can answer part of that, but so for us, our county already contracts with a grant writer who the individual departments can ask to work with. They have a relatively large workload, so not every project gets their attention. So we were lucky in that sense. I would say that it's helpful in terms of organization and getting exactly the components that you need. You're still going to be doing a lot of the work, pulling the data, writing out, narratives and things like that. So, but it's certainly helpful in terms of organization and making sure that you're not missing any marks. And then they do some fine tuning and stuff on the back end to make sure that the narratives and applications flow well. As far as getting grant money to help fund that, that would be maybe Andrew can help on that.
No, so you can't get money to have it to pay the grant writer. That's not what it's for. Now I'm gonna say you don't necessarily need one, especially for planning, since these are very small. I mean, 2 to 3 pages. And if you can put that together, and we've seen many of them, it doesn't have to be Shakespeare putting these things together. As long as you've got the necessary information in there and it's well organized, there's a very high chance that you would get awarded. Now that it's a little more true for the implementation construction grants. Those take a little bit more effort because they're usually a lot bigger, a lot higher dollar amounts. And that can be helpful, but sometimes we see them, but sometimes, folks do it on their own and it works just fine. So it's really, you have to assess your own ability to do that.
Thank you. Is there someone, next question, is there someone we can consult with about the eligibility to apply for a grant? Is there any answers that they can get ahead of that?
Angie, you wanna?
Yeah, so for it, the people that are eligible for this grant are political subdivisions of a state, and that can take on many forms. It can be some type of regional organization. Andrew has mentioned MPOs several times. Aaron has brought up councils of government. It can be a city, it can be a county, it can be school districts. We've had some state universities apply. So as long as it's a political subdivision of a state. Now, what I would kind of keep in mind, and Andrew really stressed this during his presentation, is really working with people in your community to put an application together. So if we do check for overlap, so if your police department submits an application and your engineering department submits an application, we're going to come back to you and be like, which one is coming forward, because you only get one from your community. So I'd be very mindful of that in regards to eligibility, and definitely encourage working with people in your community, other departments, other agencies, to put together an application. Something I want to really, stress too, is you can put multiple things in your application. Like, you don't have to have just one project. You can put 5 or 6 planning and demonstration projects in a planning and demonstration application. Implementation applications, we've seen multiple projects listed. There's a higher burden for those. So don't think it's just like, one project, one shot from one community. You can put a whole lot in there, and we can actually encourage you and kind of loading up in those applications, because as Andrew said, we have a lot of that planning and demonstration stuff. So if there's supplemental plans, additional data analysis, those are all great things to include in a planning and demonstration application. But we do have more guidance on the website. If you have like a particular question, like I'm a nonprofit, nonprofits are not eligible. Or state agencies are not eligible for this program. So there's some FAQs on our website that get into more details, but if that still didn't answer your question, please email us at ss4a@dot.gov.
Yeah, and let's get that email into the chat, as well as Aaron has been willing to provide his email in there. So that just went to everyone as well. So yeah, I think from my experience and how most 911 centers are organized across the country, special district service boards, as long as you're not a state entity and you're an intergovernmental cooperative or JPA, you are likely going to be eligible. But you do want to check on that. So I think that checks off a couple other questions. If for any reason we got 10 minutes left, if we don't get to everyone's questions, we will try to answer them and get them on the website. I'm going back to one of the earlier ones. It's a 3-part question, so I'm going to try to go through them all. But could a 911 center use SS4A to implement pre-arrival instructions? I think, again, that was one of my examples, so I think that would work. Could a 911 center bundle their grant application with Public Works, Police, and EMS? We talked about bundling and working together is really encouraged. And could it be used for 911 telecommunicator training, communication center upgrades? I think, again, that's going to be a very specific answer based on what you're asking for. It has to tie to traffic safety. It's got to try, our easiest tie is post-crash care stuff. So it's got to tie to the traffic safety. It can't be general training or it's going to be too far out there. But if you're specifically doing something that's going to impact your ability to respond to a crash or to keep your highway safer, it's going to be a possibility. Andrew, I think you said this, but when is the anticipated timeline for the NOFO release?
So the NOFO release is going to go out at the end of this month, probably around the 28th, 29th. It's going to be one of those dates. And then it'll be open for 90 days. So we have 90 days to apply. And then after that, we'll close it and we'll do the awards will be announced sometime later in the year. And then we'll have another cycle the following year, which will follow probably close to the same timeline. So there's $2 billion left. Again, 40% of that needs to go to planning. So, and we have a lot of money to get for planning to go out. So please apply. Planning and demonstration.
Planning and demonstration is good. Again, another question, our safety action plan will be complete in July. Should we apply for planning or implementation?
Depends on what you want to do. Do you want to, I mean, if you've got the plan complete, you can apply for implementation and we can verify it. And you can apply for those dollars. Angie, do you want to take that one? You've got a little more experience in.
Yeah, so if your plan isn't going to be complete until July, you'd have to keep it in the planning and demonstration space. Sorry, Andrew. However, if Andrew is absolutely right, if you do have your plan done, you completed it this past July, then you're good to go. But it does need to be done to apply for implementation dollars. Now, if you don't have it done, you have a plan in progress, that's fine. You can still apply for planning and demonstration dollars, and certainly would encourage you to do so.
So apologies there. I took this program over 3 months ago, so I'm learning on the fly with everybody else. But you can still apply for this, the demonstration and supplemental planning as well in there. So there's a lot of things you can do with that.
All right, our next question that I think is really a good one too is in previous years, there have been multiple rounds. Do you know yet whether this will be only one round this year or could there potentially be different rounds?
There's only going to be one round this year, so it's going to be 90 days starting at the end of this month. And that's going to be it for this year.
If a local government's transportation department's already received an SS4A planning grant and is developing a transportation focused action plan, what will another SS4A planning grant by a 911 center accomplish? And I think we've answered that already, is that we should update that plan to include the 911. Is that right?
Think of this program as an and. So, and I think Aaron in his presentation did a really good job emphasizing this, but I'm going to emphasize it again. Everything you apply for in this grant program has to be tied to an action plan. For your planning and demonstration, you need to update that action plan with anything you plan on doing. So updating your action plan, doing 2 demonstration projects, do a supplemental data analysis, do a pilot training, put all that in your application. Encourage lots of projects within the application, but I do want to emphasize it always has to tie back to that action plan. Implementation projects need to tie back to that action plan as well.
Great. And if your community's received a grant in a previous year, does it disqualify you this year or the next year?
No.
No is the answer there. All right, great. That's good news. Does the funding have to be reimbursement based, or can it all be drawn down at once? And I think the answer was reimbursement based.
This is a federal grant programs are reimbursement based, so no real wiggle room there, fortunately.
We have a couple questions that I think are going to be hard for you guys to answer, but it talks about 911's radio communications and radio infrastructure and fire station alerting. Those types of projects be used for this grant? In other words, implementing upgrades in their radio systems for interoperability or things like that. And I think, and I want you guys to jump in, but I think the answer is going to be, again, you're going to have to tie that to what's going to change, what's new, like, again, you have a radio system now. So what is the change? Why will the change improve a highway safety response? How will it help you work with your neighbors better and those types of things? And maybe, right? Angie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you said it really well, Brian. But say, maybe only, I don't know, 30% of your 911 calls are associated with traffic. Then you can put in an application and be like, Safe Streets will fund 30% of this larger project. You can proportionally fund things to the things that are, transportation safety related. But fully agree with Brian. Anything you do has to very clearly tie back to transportation safety and that comprehensive safety action plan.
Yeah, and let me give this thought to all the 911 centers people out there, is that you possess in your call handling equipment and your CAD system better data on crashes than many of the people in the transportation business. So your 911 center data, your CADs and all that can really help define your impact. Again, like I said, if you're using systems that map your 911 calls, you know whether the calls are coming from your roadway. If you could argue 30 to 50% of your calls are coming from your roadway, that helps that argument, right? You have computer aided dispatch. And when you think of traffic, don't just think of crashes, think of obstructions in the roadway, think about lights out, all the calls we get about debris in the roadway, facility, infrastructure issues, crashes, wrong way drivers, disabled vehicles, all of those become roadways, things that even traffic enforcement becomes a roadway safety issue because our officers are vulnerable in the move over crash, move over incidents. So you can search your CADs and come up with this snapshot. It's going to be different. We know that large cities, I've seen a report, large cities say 20% of police activity is traffic related. I think for many of our counties and municipalities across the county, having come from 3 different 911 centers, you're going to find that number can be even higher in many parts of the area. And so you can help tell that story with your own data. And I think that's important. So I think we answered this, but can a political subdivision such as a county apply for a group of counties, or does it have to be a council of government? Yes, people can cooperate together, correct?
Yes, absolutely. I think Iowa is like our gold star example. We had one county in Iowa coordinate with, I think it was over 60 other counties in Iowa to develop comprehensive safety action plans. So yes, and whatever that agreement looks like for your organization, we're not going to dictate like, oh, you have to have an MOU in place. You have to have some sort of structure in place, but what that structure looks like to manage for a multi-jurisdictional agency is up to you what that structure looks like.
Okay, and then I think this has been answered, but real quick, can the planning money be used to develop the action plan?
Absolutely, that's what it's there for, yes.
Okay, so that's that planning grant is to apply for the plan to develop your action plan.
It can also be used for supplemental and demonstration activities, but you must have that action plan in place first in order to do anything else.
Yeah, and then this one's on the CAD to CAD, so I don't know if this, Aaron, you could answer. We only got a couple minutes left, but are reoccurring costs covered by grant funds for CAD to CAD for 5 years, or just the implementation, training, and integration costs?
So the way maybe Andrew can give a more official answer, but the way we set up ours is that it will cover all of the costs, the implementation, the maintenance, and that kind of stuff for the 5-year period while we're running that that demonstration. Because software is a little bit trickier, and I know it's a little bit different than what maybe they're typically used to doing in terms of concrete infrastructure construction projects. Software requires annual maintenance, subscription fees, for software as a service. And so that's, we wrapped all of that in for that 5-year period.
Yeah, the only caution I would have is kind of that implementation funding is, the funding is only good for 5 years. And just because you get it for 5 years, this is a fairly new grant program. It's only authorized for 5 years. So we're heading into year 4 of the grant program. So, we don't know if this Safe Streets will be reauthorized in the next round. So I would it's fine to do exactly what Aaron described. And I think he brings up a really good point for paying for the maintenance cost. we actually encourage that with our construction people do. Like, for example, we have a lot of pilots that are doing like demonstration projects with flex posts. And we were like, hey, budget for extra flex posts, because those are going to get destroyed when your snow plows hit them. So I'm really glad, Aaron, you brought up maintenance. But if you're doing that, make sure you have a plan for when the Safe Streets funding does end.
Okay, well, that takes care of all of our questions. I really appreciate all three panelists, Andrew, Aaron, and Angie, our AAA panel there. And it was hopefully this information, we can get this out to the 911 communities and get a lot more 911 centers applying for these grants. So thank you. We appreciate your interest. My contact information is on the screen. If we didn't get to your question, please, you can email me and we'll see if we can get it answered. And again, thank you again to our panelists. We appreciate your time.
You.